The seismograph at Station Omsk 7 recorded, on the morning of September 2, 1966, an event consistent with a surface detonation of approximately 40 kilotons. The station chief filed an immediate alert. The alert went up the chain in under 3 hours. By evening, 2 military geology teams had been dispatched to the calculated epicenter in the Tyumen Lowlands, approximately 200 kilometers east of the nearest settlement. They found a crater. The crater was real. It was large, 300 meters across, 60 meters deep. The walls were clean, almost polished, in the way that a detonation leaves surfaces clean and polished. Everything about the crater was consistent with what a 40-kiloton detonation looks like from the outside. Except this, there had been no blast. No overpressure wave, no thermal pulse, no fires ignited in the surrounding forest, no trees flattened in the radial pattern that an explosion of that magnitude would produce without exception. The trees at the crater's edge were intact. Some of them still had their leaves. The seismograph had recorded an event that behaved, in every measurable parameter, like a massive explosion. But the landscape surrounding the crater showed no evidence that an explosion had occurred. Only the crater itself. A hole in the ground, with clean walls, and no blast damage and no explanation. The radiation survey, completed within 24 hours, found nothing. Not low readings. Nothing. A crater 300 meters wide and 60 meters deep does not appear without cause. The energy required to produce it goes somewhere, flattens trees, ignites fires, propagates as a pressure wave. The seismic event was recorded. Everything else is absent. The energy was released. It simply did not go anywhere outside the crater. In 1966, there was no way to hide an event like this. Every seismograph in the region recorded it. Every intelligence agency with monitoring capability knew something had happened in the Tyumen Lowlands. Today, you have a choice about what information leaves your computer. NordVPN encrypts your internet traffic and keeps your identity hidden from anyone trying to monitor your activity. If you want to protect yourself online, check the link in the pinned comment for an exclusive deal. I came to this file because of my uncle. His name was Viktor Shishky. He was a geophysicist, specifically a field geophysicist who worked for the Institute of Earth Science in Sverdlovsk through most of the 1960s and 70s. He died in 1981 at the age of 53 of what was recorded in his medical file as progressive neurological deterioration of unspecified origin. My father described him, when I was a child, as a man who had been somewhere that changed him, and who had never fully come back from wherever that was. He was quiet in the specific way of people who have decided that what they know is not something they should say aloud. I found his name 3 weeks ago, cross-referencing the personnel attachments to a file labeled Crater 3. He is listed as a field observer, attached to the second geological expedition to the Tyumen site in October of 1966. His listing is brief: name, institutional affiliation, period of assignment. He is not cited in any of the expedition's official reports. His name appears in no findings, no conclusions, no recommendations. But in the margin of a survey notes page, a handwritten annotation, small and precise, the way a careful man makes notes he doesn't intend anyone else to read, I recognized his handwriting. I have a letter he wrote my father in 1972. The letters are the same. The hand is the same. He was there, and he wrote something in the margin that I will tell you about when we reach it, because what he wrote in the margin is the sentence this entire file is built around. First, I need to tell you what the file says before it says that. The Crater 3 program was established within 72 hours of the crater's discovery, under emergency protocols that bypassed the usual institutional review process. The designation Crater 3 puzzled me initially. There was no documented Crater 1 or Crater 2 in the archive index. I eventually found a notation in an administrative memo explaining the numbering. The program was classified as the third iteration of an investigation into a specific category of anomalous geological event. The first two iterations had produced no public record. Their file designations exist in the index and their folders are absent. Someone had seen something like this before, twice. The lead investigator appointed to Crater 3 was a military geologist named Colonel Yuri Petrenko, who had the particular kind of bureaucratic authority that comes with a KGB secondary appointment. His reports are in this file, and they are, in the early months, the documents of a competent and genuinely puzzled man. He was not trying to cover anything up in September and October of 1966. He was trying to understand something that did not fit the models he had been trained with. And the reports from this period document that effort with a care I found, reading them, unexpectedly moving. His initial site assessment, filed September 8, 1966, describes the crater in terms that remain useful 6 days after discovery.
The formation presents a structural paradox that I find, after 6 days of examination, still unresolved. The crater walls exhibit compression striations consistent with extreme rapid displacement of the substrate, the kind of displacement associated with a detonation or impact event. However, the direction of the striations is incorrect for either of those causes. In an explosion, material moves outward from the center. In an impact, material moves outward from the point of contact. In this formation, the striations indicate the material moved inward and downward, toward the center, toward the base, as though the ground was not pushed out, but pulled in. I have no model for a natural or artificial event that produces inward-directed ground displacement of this magnitude. The crater was not made by something coming from outside. It was made by something taking from inside. I am filing this observation under the caution that it requires further investigation before any conclusions can be drawn. I recognize that this observation, taken at face value, implies the existence of a causative mechanism that is not in current geological or weapons literature. I am not prepared to make that implication formally. I am prepared to document the measurement data that supports it.
Inward. The ground had not been pushed out. It had been pulled in. That distinction is the key to everything that follows, and I want to make sure it lands clearly before we go further. An explosion is a release, energy moving outward, a center pushing its surroundings away. What the crater wall showed was the opposite geometry, a collection, something drawing the surrounding material inward toward a point, not an explosion in any conventional sense. Petrenko knew what he was looking at did not fit existing models. He documented it anyway. That is not a small act of courage in the context of Soviet classified research in 1966. The second expedition arrived in October. 14 researchers, field geologists, seismologists, a chemist, 2 physicists from the Institute of Nuclear Research in Dubna, apparently included on the theory that if a nuclear cause could not be ruled out, it should be specifically eliminated. Victor Schwisky was among them, my uncle. He was 38 years old. I know from my father that he came back from that expedition and spent 3 days sitting at his kitchen table before he said a single, complete sentence to anyone. What he said eventually was,
"The ground has a direction."
My father asked what he meant. He said,
"I had not understood before that the ground has a direction. Now I do."
He did not explain further. The second expedition produced, alongside its official documentation, a set of personal field journal entries that several researchers submitted voluntarily to Petrenko at the end of the site visit. He filed them without comment in a subfolder labeled Supplementary Personal Accounts. There are 6 entries. The one I keep returning to is from October 12th, 1966. The first day any expedition member descended to the crater floor. It is written by my uncle. It is the only direct record of Victor Schwisky's thoughts from inside that crater that exists in any form.
"I went to the floor today. I have been to a great many geological sites in 15 years of field work. Caves, mines, volcanic formations. I know what the ground feels like from the inside. I know the particular weight of air at depth, the specific quality of silence in a space with stone walls. This is different from all of those. The silence at the base of this crater is not the silence of enclosed space. It is the silence of something listening. I do not know how to make that distinction scientific. I know that I can feel the difference between a cave that is simply quiet and a space that is attending. This space is attending. There is a direction to the attention. It comes from below, from the center of the floor, from the point where Pochinova is collecting her samples. Bobrov noticed the cold before I told him it was there. A temperature that runs backward, coldest at the center of the floor, which is the reverse of every thermal model for enclosed spaces. Pochinova noticed the compression before her instruments confirmed it. We are all noticing the same thing from different angles, through our different instruments, and our different instruments are all pointing at the same point. I believe the point is the source. I believe the source is not finished. I do not know what it is not finished with."
He wrote that in October 1966. He came home and sat at the kitchen table for 3 days. The second expedition's official report is where the file begins to divide against itself. The civilian research team's summary, filed under the signatures of the geologists and physicists, describes the crater as exhibiting unusual but potentially explicable characteristics, consistent with a previously unidentified class of subsurface void collapse. It recommends further study. It is cautious, carefully worded, and reads like a document produced by people who reached a consensus not about what they believed, but about what they were willing to put their names to. Petrenko's military geology summary, filed the same week, describes the site as posing an unresolved security concern and recommends immediate restricted access. It uses the word unresolved 11 times in 14 pages. It is the document of a man who has more to say than he is saying. Here's the first contradiction. The civilian summary states that the crater was formed on September 2nd, 1966, consistent with the seismograph record. This is the date that appears in every public-facing document related to the event. Petrenko's internal annex, a 3-page addendum attached to his military summary, marked separately and requiring a different access level to view, states that ground-penetrating survey data indicates the crater structure predates September 2nd by a minimum of 11 days. The walls show evidence of settling and secondary compression that could not have developed in the 48 hours between formation and first survey. The crater was formed on or before August 22nd. The seismograph recorded an event on September 2nd. The crater was already there. What the seismograph recorded was not the formation of the crater, it was something else. 11 days. The crater sat in the Tyumen lowlands for 11 days, undetected, before the instrument that should have recorded its formation recorded something entirely different, happening at the same location. The seismologist who operated Station Omsk 7, a man named Grigory Lebedev, was summoned before the Crater 3 Review Commission in November 1966. He was asked repeatedly and with increasing pressure whether the equipment could have malfunctioned, whether the record could represent a ghost signal, a calibration artifact. He said no each time. The Commission's frustration is readable in the transcribed exchange. His final statement to the Commission reads,
"I understand what you're asking me to confirm, and I cannot confirm it. The equipment was functioning within normal parameters. The record is accurate. What Station Omsk 7 recorded on the morning of September 2nd, 1966, was a genuine seismic event of the logged magnitude and at the logged coordinates. I cannot explain why the physical evidence at the site is inconsistent with a formation event on that date. I can only tell you that the instrument recorded what it recorded, and the instrument does not invent readings. If the site evidence shows the crater predates our record, then the record is not a record of the crater's formation. I have spent 6 weeks trying to determine what else it could be a record of. I do not have an answer. What I have is this. The signal on September 2nd is not identical to a standard detonation signature. It is close to one. It is not one. There are elements of the waveform that I have not seen in any detonation record I have reviewed, and I have reviewed several hundred. There is a component of the September 2nd signal that is consistent with the seismic signature of a very large mass moving a very short distance very quickly. Not an explosion. A movement. Something below the Tyumen lowland at depth moved on the morning of September 2nd. I cannot tell you what it was. I can tell you that it moved, and that it was large, and that it moved toward the surface coordinates where the crater had already been for 11 days.
Lebedev was reassigned to a station in the Kamchatka region 6 weeks after giving that testimony. His reassignment paperwork describes it as a routine rotation. He had been at Station Omsk 7 for 9 years. I keep returning to those 11 days. The geologist who came closest to addressing this was a woman named Dr. Nina Pochinova from the Institute of Earth Science in Sverdlovsk. She was 41 years old, a specialist in anomalous soil formations, and her personal field notes from the October expedition are preserved in this file in their original handwritten form. They are the most honest document in the folder. Her entry from October 14th, 1966, the third day of the second expedition, reads,
October 14th, 1966, third day of the second expedition.
The entry continues on the next page. Her entry from October 17th, 1966 reads,
I have spent 2 days taking samples from the crater floor, and I need to write down what I am finding before the official summary process requires me to translate it into language that will make it sound less than it is. The material at the base of the crater is wrong in a way I can measure but cannot currently explain. Soil compresses under pressure, and that compression is readable in the grain structure. You can look at compacted soil and understand the direction and magnitude of the force that compacted it, the same way you can read stress lines in stone. The grain structure at the crater base shows compression from above, from below, and from all 4 lateral directions simultaneously. That is not possible. Compression events have a source. They come from somewhere. The source is always readable in the grain orientation. The material at this crater base was compressed from every direction at once toward a central point, as though whatever caused this was not a force applied from outside, but a reduction of space itself at that location. I do not know how to write this in the official report. I do not know what model contains this observation. I am writing it here because I will not be able to write it anywhere that will be read, and it is too important to simply not write.
A reduction of space itself. She was a field geologist, not a physicist. She found, in soil grain structures, evidence for something her vocabulary could not contain, and she wrote it down in the only place she could. I have read that entry many times. Each time, the phrase that stays with me is not the impossible finding. It is the sentence before it. I will not be able to write it anywhere that will be read. She was right about that, but she did not stop writing. Her entry from October 19th, 1966, the final day before the expedition departed, reads,
We leave tomorrow. I want to document what 8 days at the base of this crater does to a person. Not the measurements, those are in the official record, stripped of everything that made them significant. I mean, what it does to the person. On the first day I was a scientist with instruments. By the 4th day, I could feel the direction of the compression through my hands before the instruments confirmed it. By the 7th day, I could feel it from the rim. Standing 60 meters above the floor, I could feel the pull of the central point the way you feel a current in water before you can describe its direction. I raised this with Bobrov. He had felt it 2 days earlier without mentioning it to me. Schwisky felt it on day 1. We have been measuring the same thing with the only instrument sensitive enough to detect it, ourselves. The crater has a center. The center has a direction. The direction is not in the official instruments. But when I stand at the base of this crater, I can feel it the way you feel the presence of something large in a dark room. Not by seeing it, not by hearing it, but by the way the air changes when something that size is present.
She was right. Her personal notes are not cited anywhere in the official report. Her official contribution is 4 paragraphs of generic geological description that could have been written without visiting the site. The file does not record what happened to Dr. Pochinova after the expedition. Her personnel record shows her last day of registered employment as November 3rd, 1966, 18 days after the expedition returned. Reason given, personal decision. Now, I need to tell you the moment this file broke open entirely. I had been asking, what caused the crater? That was the wrong question. The right question is what the crater was for. The answer to that question is in the seismograph archive. Not the September 2nd record, the earlier one. In the process of cross-referencing the Crater 3 file against regional seismographic records, I found an entry in the Station Omsk 7 archive from October 4th, 1952, 14 years before the crater appeared. The entry records a seismic event at the same coordinates, same location, same depth signature, same magnitude. An identical event 14 years earlier at the same point. In 1952, no crater was reported. The record was filed as an anomalous reading and archived without follow-up. It has been sitting in the regional archive for 68 years, correctly dated and entirely unconnected to Crater 3, because no one had reason to connect them. Until now. Whatever produced that seismic signature did it in 1952, and again in 1966. The same event, 14 years apart, in the same place. And in 1952 there was no crater. And in 1966 the crater was already 11 days old when the seismograph fired. The seismograph is not recording the formation of the crater. It is recording something that recurs at that location on a schedule. I want to be careful about what I am implying here. I am an archivist. My work is documents. What I am describing is not a theory. It is what two seismographic records, cross-referenced against a geological expedition file, produce when read together. The records are real. The coordinates match, the magnitudes match, the signatures match. Whatever interpretation you place on that coincidence, the coincidence itself is not a matter of interpretation. What I can say is this. Something at those coordinates in the Tyumen lowland produces an event that the instruments at station Omsk 7 are designed to detect, and it does so on a cycle that is longer than a human working life. The people who investigated in 1966 were not alive in 1952, and would not have known to look. The people who might have investigated in 1980 were, apparently, either not dispatched or not filing in accessible records. The cycle continues regardless of whether anyone is watching. It does not require an audience. Something that was there in 1952 and again in 1966, and whose next scheduled occurrence, if the interval held, would have been sometime in 1980. I have checked the 1980 seismograph archive. September 8, 1980. Station Omsk 7. Same coordinates, same magnitude, same signature. I do not know if an expedition was dispatched. The records are not in any archive I have been able to access. The record simply ends. A seismic entry with nothing attached. A signal that recurs on its own schedule regardless of whether anyone is watching, regardless of whether the program that was supposed to be watching it still exists. My uncle died the following year, 1981. I want to tell you what happened to the crater between 1966 and the time the file goes cold. The program ran through 1967, with quarterly site visits and continuous monitoring by a reduced team. The crater showed no further seismic activity, no changes to its structure, no explanation for its existence materialized. Petrenko's reports from 1967 are progressively shorter, not because the situation resolved, but because he had run out of things to say that he had not already said. His final quarterly report from November 1967 is 2 pages. The last paragraph reads,
I have submitted 7 reports over 14 months, and the central finding of each has been the same. The formation is real, its cause is unknown, and our current investigative methods are insufficient to determine that cause. I do not believe additional observation of the existing kind will produce new information. The site is what it is. The records are complete. I recommend the program be placed in inactive monitoring status until a new investigative approach is identified. I recognize this recommendation is not a resolution. I do not have a resolution to offer.
The program was placed in inactive monitoring status in December 1967, which is bureaucratic language for we stopped looking. Petrenko's final official recommendation, the document that formally requested inactive status, closed with a paragraph that I find, in the context of everything this file contains, unexpectedly honest.
I want to note for the record that inactive monitoring status is not a conclusion. It is an acknowledgement that we have reached the limit of what current methods allow us to determine. The formation at Tyumen coordinates remains unexplained. The seismographic record remains unexplained. The directional compression and data documented by Expedition 2 remains unexplained. I am recommending this program be placed in inactive status, not because these questions have been answered, but because I have no further methods to apply to them. I believe the questions matter. I believe the formation is not finished, that whatever process created it has not concluded, and that the conclusion, when it comes, will be significant. I am filing this belief here as a formal notation in the record, because I believe someone should be aware of it, and because I do not know who else to tell.
He believed the formation was not finished. My uncle believed the same thing, written in the margin of a survey page in a different hand, in the same file 50 years earlier. Two men at opposite ends of the same crater, arriving at the same 5 words. Here is the second contradiction. The inactive monitoring budget for 1968 to 1971 reflects passive equipment only, no personnel at the site. The site access log for the same period, maintained by a regional transportation authority with no connection to the classified program, shows vehicle movements to and from the Tyumen site. Quarterly, regular, the same 2 vehicle designations, appearing and disappearing like a pulse. Someone was visiting the crater every 3 months for 3 years, off the record, under no documented authority. The visit stopped in spring 1971. The vehicle designations simply ceased to appear. Whatever they were going there to do, it was done. And then, in the third phase of this file's strange life, there is the recording. A reel-to-reel audio tape is listed in the Crater 3 Evidence Index, cataloged under the notation Field Recording, Site Interior, October 1966, duration 22 minutes. The tape itself is present in the file. I can confirm this because the archive notation shows it was accessed before my review, as recently as 2003 by a researcher whose name is redacted. The tape was played, transcribed, and the transcription filed alongside it. I will read you the transcription in full because it is only 2 pages, and because every word of it matters. The transcription reads,
Recording begins. Ambient sound. Wind at crater rim, moderate. Footsteps descending. Duration approximately 4 minutes. Footsteps stop. Ambient sound. Wind diminishes. Silence, approximately 30 seconds. Voice, male, unidentified. We are at the base. Depth approximately 58 meters by measurement. Walls as described. Floor as described. Temperature notable. I estimate 5 to 8 degrees below the ambient surface temperature. No obvious cause for the temperature differential. Silence approximately 2 minutes. Voice. Something is different at the floor level. I want to describe this carefully. The air at this depth has a pressure to it that is not consistent with simple altitude difference. It feels like the air here is heavier than it should be. Not thicker, heavier. The way water feels heavier than air, even when you're just standing in it up to your waist. There is resistance to movement. I'm moving my arm and it requires more effort than it should. Silence, approximately 90 seconds. Voice. The instruments are not reading this. The pressure gauge shows normal. The instruments are not reading what I am experiencing. I want that in the record. The instruments say normal. The body says something else.
The transcription ends there. Silence, approximately 4 minutes. During this silence, a low-frequency sound becomes audible on the recording, below the range of easy hearing, felt more than heard, consistent throughout. Then the voice returns, quieter now.
It is underneath us. I don't mean underground. I mean in a direction I don't have a word for. There is a direction here that does not exist at the surface. I can feel the direction. I am standing at the base of this crater, and there is a direction that this place has that the surface does not have, and I can feel it, the way you feel the direction of a sound before you consciously register hearing anything. The instruments are not reading this direction. The direction is not in the instruments.
Long silence. The low frequency continues.
I think it is aware that we are here. I am not going to qualify that statement. I am simply going to say it and let the record contain it. I think it is aware. I think the event that the seismograph recorded on September 2nd was not a geological event. I think it was a signal. I think we were supposed to find this.
Recording ends. The voice is not identified in the transcription. The tape has no label beyond the catalog entry. I have listened to enough field recordings and enough archives to recognize, when I hear or read them, the specific quality of a person who is speaking for the record because they believe they may not get another opportunity. That is what this transcription sounds like. There is one document left in the Crater 3 file, the one I have been building toward. It is an expedition field report, formatted identically to the reports produced by the second expedition in October 1966. It lists a site visit to the Tyumen crater. It lists findings. It lists recommendations. It is dated June 14, 1971. The Crater 3 program was placed in inactive monitoring status in December 1967. No further expeditions were authorized. There is no expedition order in this file for June 1971, no personnel authorization, no transportation requisition. The file index shows no active period between 1967 and the program's formal closure in 1973. The expedition that produced this report does not officially exist. The report is signed by 5 names. I have cross-referenced all 5. None of them appear in any prior Crater 3 documentation. None of them have personnel files in the standard archive system. They are names attached to a report produced by people who have no official existence. The findings section of the report is 1 paragraph.
The site has changed since the 1966 expedition. The crater walls have partially collapsed inward. The compression striations Expedition 2 identified are no longer measurable, as the walls have continued to move toward the center by an estimated 12 to 15 meters on all sides. The crater is becoming smaller. It is not filling with sediment or debris. The walls themselves are contracting. the site is not stable. It is active. Whatever process formed, this feature has not concluded. We recommend immediate re-establishment of active monitoring and a full physics review. We do not believe this site will remain at its current dimensions. We do not believe current models adequately describe what is occurring here. We have no further recommendations because we do not know what the correct next step is for a situation of this kind.
The crater was getting smaller. The walls were moving inward, not collapsing in the way of ordinary geological settlement, but contracting actively toward the center, toward whatever direction the man in the recording had felt at the base, toward the point Pochinova's grain analysis had identified as the locus of simultaneous compression from every direction, toward whatever my uncle had felt on his first day at the floor and had spent the next 15 years carrying quietly. The program was formally closed in 1973. No final survey. The closing memo declares the program complete, bureaucratic language for, we stopped looking, and this time we are not coming back. I have been trying for 3 weeks to find any satellite or aerial survey of the Tyumen lowland coordinates that would show me what the site looks like now. I have found one reference, a survey from 1989, in which the coordinates appear in the survey grid and the notation reads, "No feature present." The crater is gone. By 1989, the formation had closed entirely. The ground is flat, no feature present. The thing drew itself closed, the way a wound closes, the way a question closes when it has received the answer it required. And my uncle Victor was there, in October 1966, in the second expedition, as a field observer who left no official trace except a name in a personnel attachment and a handwritten note in the margin of a survey page. I want to tell you what the margin note says, because I have been carrying it since I found it 3 weeks ago and I need to put it down. The survey page it appears on is the soil composition analysis for the crater floor, the same analysis that Pochinova described in her personal notes, the simultaneous multi-directional compression that she could not account for. The official analysis renders the data in tables and numbers and careful technical language. And in the margin of the second page, in my uncle's handwriting, in the small, careful letters he used for things he was thinking through, there are 5 words. The words are, "It is not finished yet." I do not know if he meant the analysis. I do not know if he meant the crater. I do not know if he meant whatever process had pulled the ground inward toward a point that exists in a direction the surface does not have. What I know is that he wrote those 5 words in October 1966 and carried whatever he understood for 15 years in silence. That he told my father the ground has a direction and would not explain. That he died at 53 with that knowledge intact, having decided, carefully and finally, not to pass it along. He was wrong. He passed it along, in the margin note he wrote for himself, left in a classified file that would eventually be read by the person in his family who spent their life reading classified files. Through paper, through patience, through the specific persistence of a document that outlasts the caution of the person who wrote it. I have been sitting in this archive room for 6 hours. The lamp is steady, the room is quiet. I am going to leave now and go somewhere where the ground is unambiguous and flat and has no particular direction that I can feel the presence of. Though I notice, as I write this, that I have been aware for some time of a direction in this room that the room should not have. Below the floor, but not below in the sense of down. Slightly inward from where I am sitting. Present the way my uncle described it. Not loud, not frightening, simply attending. I notice it the way you notice a sound that has been present for some time before you consciously register it. I am going to leave now. It is not finished yet.